Over the last couple of years, we've seen some pretty popular retro reissue watches. A few that come to mind are the Q Timex range, the Bulova Devil Diver, and a couple of different offerings from Seiko and Hamilton. Japanese brand Orient have decided to get in on the action too, with a watch that they have listed on their site as the Mechanical Revival watch. Not only is the name a bit disjointed, but from my experience with this over the last couple of weeks, I think the rest of the watch is too. And as a whole, it's a very underwhelming attempt from a brand that I have a soft spot for. So let's talk about why that's the case and how I think they could have done a better job. If you disagree with my thoughts and still want to purchase this, it's linked in the description, and thanks to Amazon for covering the cost of this watch for a review. The watch arrived in the typical Orient packaging, which you can see here. Nothing special, but serviceable for sure. So let's begin with the name. Yeah, with a generic name like Mechanical Revival Watch followed by a huge code, however good the watch is, it's always going to struggle. From the looks of the broken English text description, this is based on a 1970s model called the SK, or Super King Diver, which looks virtually identical to this one. Independent dealers have done their best to make the connection to that original watch by calling it the SK Revival, Orient Diver Retro, or SK Diver Reissue. However, that inconsistency in the naming is always going to be there when the brand has been so lazy with its designation. In my view, Orient should just have pitched this to customers as the SK Diver Reissue and been done with it. Perhaps that's what they did with some of the watch dealers, I don't know, but us customers really haven't seen that clear messaging. Unfortunately, along with their ancient website, this shoddy naming scheme is one of the areas that traditional brands like Orient are lagging behind the competition. I'd be interested to know why they decided to bring back this model, as to me, it's a bit of an ugly duckling. The overall design language here is very loud. The dial features a purple central stripe which then fades to black on each side. This is accompanied by an array of gold accents, including the applied indices and logo, alongside the equally blingy baton handset. Unusually, those hour markers are presented within two curved block sections that intrude into that magenta area. Why these are here, I do not know. It just doesn't seem to flow very nicely. Other odd choices are evident too. In addition to the gold indices, you also have a set of adjacent lume pips that run the circumference of the dial, and then two inked markers at each hour on the internal bezel, totaling a remarkable 4 indicators at each hour when the bezel is aligned regularly. If you're partially sighted, perhaps this could be useful. Otherwise, it just seems like overkill, and it results in more clutter that in my eyes just doesn't need to be there. There are also some orange numbers at each quarter of an hour on the bezel, which could come in handy, however the colour simply doesn't fit the rest of the theme here. Dare I say, visually, genuinely it reminds me of some sort of Indian Franken watch that you might see on eBay. My opinions aside though, if you do like the look of the watch, this appears to be a near identical clone of the original. It certainly looks like some sort of retro watch, and the inner rotating bezel is particularly cool, even though you'll probably never use it for reasons I'll discuss in a moment. I'll pop up a lume shot here so you can see how it performs in the dark. As is always the case with Orient, the main bulk of the watch feels substantial and sturdy for the £200 retail price. It's constructed of the industry standard 316L steel and comes in at a rather large 41.7mm wide, 12.6mm thick, and 46mm lug tip to lug tip. When on wrist, the best way to describe this watch is thick. It certainly looks and feels beefy, with an asymmetrical case shape that is squared off towards the crown, yet curved on the opposite. The lower portion tapers off rather sharply, whilst the brush bezel atop remains flat to provide that retro blocky aesthetic. Honestly, I'm a big fan of symmetry in my watches, so maybe I'd like to have seen that boxiness extend to both sides. It's definitely a watch for larger wrists, unlike mine, as it's pretty heavy too, or at least the case is. Unfortunately, the bracelet is light and flimsy, which throws off the weight balance and means the SK really moves around on the wrist. It contains folded links and has the same feel as that on the much cheaper TriStar watch that I reviewed earlier this year, which isn't really a good thing. The push clasp is okay, but overall the bracelet doesn't integrate very well with the polished case and is rather disappointing for a £200 watch. You get hardened mineral crystal over the dial, which is okay, though I would have liked to have seen sapphire ideally, given the increased price over other Orient models, especially given the fact that the watch has got the word crystal printed on the dial. Perhaps that refers to all the gold bits instead, or maybe the jewels in the movement, who knows. While this is a little frustrating, my main gripe with this watch is the water resistance. This is supposed to be a reissue of the SK Diver, yet the watch has a mere 5-bar water resistance. By Orient's submission in the product manual, this isn't even suitable for diving. To me, it seems bizarre to revive a dive-style watch that then can't be used for its intended purpose almost. Sure, back in the day, maybe the aquatic performance wasn't very reliable. However, with this modern construction, I don't see how this can't have at least 10 bar. For instance, the similarly priced Orient King Diver has 20 bar, which is far better. Nevertheless, in most situations, 5 bar will generally have you covered. Just seems like a silly decision. Powering the watch is thankfully an automatic movement, which you'd expect to see at this price point. According to the case rear, this is the 22 jewel caliber Orient F6922, which hand winds and hacks should you need those additional functionalities. Upon first impressions, this movement seems to be quieter than that in the back of the Bambino and TriStar watches, which both feature super loud rotors. This one's by no means silent, but it's slightly less frustrating. Unfortunately, the date window this movement provides is once again white, which contrasts a little too starkly with the dark colours present on the dial. Still, you can't ask for a great deal more than this at the price. The beat rate is 6 per second, and the power reserve is a fairly standard 40 hours. You'll find this packed into other popular models such as the Reissue and Mako 2. Overall, despite the somewhat interesting movement, it doesn't justify the £200 price tag in my opinion. If you could grab one of these for say £80 on sale, I think it could make for a fun retro watch to add to your collection. Though the clunky design, the lack of water resistance and the awful bracelet just leave a bad taste in my mouth. Sure, the likes of the Timex watches have similarly low specifications, however they generally look pretty good. Whereas this one, yeah, can't say that. Especially when Orient have got other models such as those 2 divers I just mentioned, and the Kamasu or Kamasu, however you say it, which certainly looks much better and has higher water resistance too. If you haven't done so already, consider subscribing. I'll see you next time.